Morning, and I want just making sure we have everyone here that we are looking for. Great. We have a number of special guests today. Our deep dive topic is going to be child abuse and domestic violence. And so we have a couple of lieutenants who are going to speak to that, as well as some folks from other departments at APD. Now, let me also just do a quick check on our social media. Give me a thumbs up or pause. Okay, looking good there. Danielle, I'm trying not to say her name. So thanks, Danielle. All right, so, okay. So with that, let's go ahead and begin. So first, some updates from around central New Mexico. The U.S. Small Business Administration has opened applications Monday for agricultural businesses in New Mexico. And they can now apply for, and these are a loan program that is available for agricultural businesses, and it's part of the CARES Act, and so they're now taking loans for that. So this is something you can reach out to the Small Business Administration for. Okay, also the New Mexico Human Services Department and the Public Education Department have announced that they have a $97 million chunk of funds for additional food benefits, and that's enough to feed about 245,000 vulnerable children. And so, again, that's part of the EBT relief program effort. So some good news on funding there. I also want to mention some updates from our water authority. You know, we've been very fortunate in central New Mexico to not have any challenges around electricity, gas, and water. So we appreciate P&M and the New Mexico Gas Company for their part in that. And then, of course, our water authority, which is, again, it's a separate authority sort of jointly overseen by the county and the city. And the water authority has worked to halt non-payment on shutoffs. Worked to halt shutoffs for non-payment. And so we really appreciate that during these times. Also, the Water Authority announced that they will not be increasing rates this year. So a little bit of relief for all of us, especially now that spring is here and we're all using a lot more water. Also, the Water Authority sent emergency tankers to Gallup yesterday at the request of the State Emergency Management Office to assist Navajo communities that are being affected by the city's corona lockdown. And these two tankers carry about 5,000 gallons of water each, and they serve people who no longer have access to drinking water that they would usually transport from the city. So this is a really good example of just everyone stepping up in whatever way they can. I want to thank the Water Authority and their leadership, and the director's leadership for making that happen. As folks know, in Navajo country, there are lots and lots of water access issues. So there's a regular weekly dynamic of folks from all over the reservation coming to different locations to get water and then bring it back to their home or to their ranch. And so now that's all been disrupted because of what's happening in Gallup and so forth. So this is very, very important to be able to support both the city of Gallup and the surrounding folks on the reservation. Now, I think what we'll do is go ahead and get into our deep dive topic for today. And we do have some slide material that we're going to show, so hopefully this is, you can see it each on your respective social media platforms and cameras. But I want to highlight first the trends from a few weeks ago that may or may not be affected by COVID-19. And so today we're going to dive into domestic violence and child abuse. Now, these are the two categories, right? These are crimes that occur typically inside the home. And so all across America, this is a big concern as more people are staying home. And these crimes also, when we see trends like this, it's very helpful for us in terms of where we can target resources. And so we also want to remember that the numbers we're going to share with you, these represent individual people, they represent children, and so these statistics are extremely important for people's lives. And we're going to touch on them here today. Now, I want to show something first on the surface in terms of calls for service. APD has responded. If you look at this, it's about the same as last year. You can see the month-by-month review, and you can see actually in March calls were a little bit down. Now that the whole COVID thing didn't really start till the end of March, so we're hoping optimistically that was sort of a good thing. But then you can see sort of in April it's been flat. Now the challenge with this is, we know that, unfortunately, because the abuser might be also in the home, there's no safe place for the victim or a witness to call one of our lines or to call APD. So we are not saying that this actually means domestic violence is flat or that child abuse is flat. We don't know specifically, but we're actually very concerned about this because we expected to see a spike. And so part of the reason why we're sharing this is because we want people to know the different outlets that they do have. And so I want to mention, too, that it's also totally natural and normal and fine to reach out to advocates as opposed to APD. And so we're going to talk about some of the advocacy groups that are involved and there to help. That also could be another reason why actual calls at APD are flat, because the advocacy group might be handling more of those. Now, we want to mention that, let's look at just one day, an example of what's happening right now in our city. This is just Friday, right? This is a couple of Fridays ago. 48 domestic violence calls in 24 hours, and then 29 incidents involving physical violence or threats of violence. So this is just one day for us, again, in an environment that, from our perspective, at least from call volume, is basically flat. So we want to remind folks, these have been long-standing challenges in our community, as we know, and that has not changed. Of course, what has changed is the layering in of the coronavirus into this dynamic. And we're actually going to hear from one of our lieutenants who's going to speak to some of the examples of the kind of calls we do get and how they're corona-related. Now, I also want to touch on child abuse a little bit. Similarly, of course, reports of child abuse have been down dramatically, but unfortunately that doesn't mean that our kids are safe. Most children don't report their own abuse. That's sort of obvious, but we want to remind folks of that. Most abuse is recognized by third parties. It's teachers, counselors, relatives, even sometimes folks at community centers and Parks and Recs folks who deal with children. So again, this is another real challenge. If kids are at home, there's less adults available and seeing and understanding what's going on. This is also a small reason why we want to really reopen a lot of our youth programs, is so we also have some additional adults around our children to provide avenues for things like this. So with school being out and kids at home, again, it could be very difficult to really understand what's happening inside the home when children can't report. So what you can do is continue to be, the eyes and ears, of course, for victims of domestic violence and vulnerable children. Support and role neighbors can play, and families still. So those family check-ins, which we know are still happening, are very important. We're also going to hear today from Bailey McCullough, who works with our Family Advocacy Center, and she's going to talk about some other ways that everyone in Albuquerque can help. So let's begin with a bit of a deeper look into this with Lieutenant Scott Norris on domestic violence. Lieutenant?
Hello, I'm Lieutenant Scott Norris of the Violent Crime Section of the Albuquerque Police Department. As the mayor said, we are concerned that fewer people are calling police, and more of those daily calls are resulting in arrests. We also know that some people are directly mentioning COVID-19 as a contributing factor to the incident that led to the 911 calling. As the mayor had pointed out, he gave a snapshot on a day taken in April, I believe it was April 24th, of the calls for service that we responded to as it relates to domestic violence. And just to reiterate what he said, those were 48 calls for service, 29 involved physical violence and threats of physical violence. 9 of those arrests were for domestic violence, for charges resulting in battery upon a household member. And we actually have some of the pictures of the individuals who were arrested on that day. Here's a breakdown of some specifics of those calls. 4 criminal summons were issued resulting in domestic violence charges. 10 incidents in which one or both parties were intoxicated. 9 incidents in which victims indicated a history of domestic violence, and 9 incidents in which the caller or victim mentioned mental illness. There were 4 incidents with references to COVID-19. A man and a woman got into an argument because the ex-boyfriend did not want the child to leave with the mother who had just got tested for COVID-19. A woman did not want her ex-boyfriend, the father of their children, to take the kids because of COVID-19. And a man got angry at his girlfriend because she walked to the mailbox and then went to a nearby apartment and gathered with a group of people. The man was upset because he said he had to maintain social distancing. A man said he was having a difficult time with his treatment for PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome, because he could not see a psychiatrist face-to-face. If victims aren't comfortable or they don't have an opportunity to call police, we strongly recommend that they reach out to our victims advocates for help. And there are 3 resources that I'm about to give you, phone numbers that you can call if in the event that you're not comfortable calling police. Understand that we are still responding to these calls. We don't have any hesitation in responding to these calls with regard to the ongoing pandemic. It doesn't have any bearing on response to our domestic violence calls. But you can call the Family Advocacy Center at 505-924-6000, and you can ask for the advocacy unit. You can also call the Domestic Violence Resource Center. They have a 24-hour hotline at 505-248-3165. And then the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-SAFE. And we'll also bring up, as Mayor Keller had mentioned earlier, we also have our advocate unit supervisor to give you more information about what type of resources and services those advocates can provide.
Thank you so much, Lieutenant. Now, to talk a little bit about the Crimes Against Children Unit, Lieutenant Sanders is here. Lieutenant.
Good afternoon, good morning, everybody. I just want to say thank you for tuning in to this. Thank you, Mayor Keller, for hosting this and allowing us to talk about the important topics for child abuse and domestic violence. They actually do kind of relate to each other. So my name is Nicholas Sanders. I am the lieutenant of the juvenile section for the Albuquerque Police Department. We investigate child abuse, child neglect, sexual abuse, and the exploitation of children. So I want everybody to kind of think just for a minute back into their childhood. Hopefully everybody can come up with positive memories. Some people will not. However, if I ask you to think of a bad memory from your childhood, I'm pretty sure you're able to come up with something. Now, as an adult, we understand how to call for resources. We understand how to reach out, and we are able to understand what is kind of going on with that situation much better than what a child is. And as a child, like I said, they may not fully understand what is going on to them, and they need a voice. They need some help. Typically, that voice comes from a third party, from a coach, a counselor, from a relative, from a church member. What I'm asking you to be is also part of that third party and to be the voice for the child. Even though we're under unique times and we're a little restricted because of the pandemic, we're still going to grocery stores and other outings that we can see children and possibly interact with children. Whether that's on a webcam or, like I said, in a grocery store, you still have that opportunity to be the third party. And what I'm asking you to do is if you notice something that is not normal, if you notice bruises on a child, if you notice a child is acting just a little off, or if you notice that a adult is being overly aggressive with the child, is to report that information in so we can do something about it. The way to report it is pound SAFE, pound 7233. That will put you in contact with the statewide central intake. They will go ahead and provide that information over to CYFD and into law enforcement so we can start looking at an investigation. And just because you report something doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to go on a criminal avenue. We have a lot of families right now that are in need of resources. And some of the things that we may witness is a family that is in need of resources and just having a lot of stress. The partners that we work with, CYFD and others, have been listed on the City of Albuquerque's website, and you can look through those to see if there's anything that may be able to help you as a family, or if you know somebody that is in need of help, you can also refer them to those resources. How to report beyond the pound SAFE, you don't need to have all the information about an adult or a child to report. You can simply have a description of an adult, a description of a child, and some sort of indicator information that we can use to further identify where they live. So if you're at a grocery store and you notice an over-aggressive adult with a child, you can take that description and hopefully maybe get a license plate or some other indicator, and you can provide that over to Sky. Then we can start the investigative process and we can see if it's a criminal intervention that is necessary or if it's a resource to the family that is necessary. You can also do this anonymously. So if you have some concerns about providing your information, don't have that concern, you can be anonymous when you report this information. Now, as I mentioned about the resources on the City of Albuquerque's website, I also wanted to take an opportunity to talk about one additional website. It's the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. A lot of children are going online now, simply because of the way that things are. Our stay-at-home families have become daycare, schools, places of employment, and children have been turning to online resources to educate or to get other outlets. NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, has a ton of resources to help you figure out how to keep your children safe online and allow them to use those resources positively. The preventative steps that you can take from that will outweigh any kind of negative effect that you might think that you're going to have on your child. It is important to ensure that we're protecting our children and protecting each other's children. The last part that I want to talk about for the safety of children are hot cars. As we move forward into the summer months, we've started to see a lot of additional calls reference children left in cars. I can understand as a parent that maybe you want to limit the exposure of your child to the pandemic. However, you're also exposing your child to additional dangers of strangers coming by to the car or simply the temperature in the car rising very rapidly. I would ask that you utilize the additional resources that are listed on the city's website, drive-in services or food take-home services to help alleviate some of those concerns. I appreciate everybody again listening to this, and I want to reiterate, if you see something, say something. If you hear something and you live in an apartment and you can hear something through the walls, say something. We are able to get out there and get ourselves involved with the public and the families to ensure the safety of the children even during this pandemic. So again, please, the simplest way, the best way, pound SAFE on your phone, 7233. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Lieutenant Sanders. And now we also want to hear from our Victims Advocate Unit, Supervisor Bailey McCullough. Bailey?
Hello, my name is Bailey McCullough. I am the Victim Advocate Supervisor with the Albuquerque Police Department. The Advocate Unit is a small unit that is housed at the Family Advocacy Center, and our mission is to connect victims of interpersonal violence with their investigations as well as community resources. Today I'm going to briefly talk about trends that domestic violence advocates are seeing currently. We're grateful that Albuquerque is taking the stay-at-home order so seriously. With that comes the acknowledgement that home isn't always a safe place. Like Mayor Keller mentioned, we haven't really seen a significant increase or decrease in calls for service with domestic violence, but that doesn't mean that it's not happening. What we have seen is a stark decrease in connecting victims with resources after they report. There are organizations and advocates in Albuquerque who are here to help during the pandemic get victims of domestic violence to safety. One of the APD's biggest partners, the Domestic Violence Resource Center, is one of these organizations. The Domestic Violence Resource Center has a 24/7 hotline that is manned by trauma-informed advocates. These advocates can help if you have been a victim of a violent incident, if you're experiencing emotional or physical abuse by a partner, if you're a victim of stalking by a partner or an ex-partner, if you have questions about whether your partner's behaviors are abusive. They're here to help if you have decided to reach out and report to the police, or if you have made the decision not to report to the police. All of their services are free, confidential, and meet social distancing guidelines. Just like the other lieutenants have mentioned, I want to briefly speak to those of you who might witness domestic violence incidents. One of the things that we do know is that third-party reporting is down, and we are really hoping that that is going to change. Oftentimes, victims can't get to a safe location to call for help, and this is where they need you to step in. If you witness a domestic violence incident with your friends, your family, your neighbors, or strangers, please do not hesitate to reach out to the police. We are counting on you. Again, I want to reiterate the number for the domestic violence hotline, like Lieutenant Norris did earlier. That phone number is 505-248-3165, and they're here to help you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Bailey. So I think with that, we're going to be here for some questions if folks have them, and so we'll tee those up. Just want to mention that, again, we have to be the eyes and ears when it comes to victims of domestic violence and vulnerable children. And so just want to reiterate, call 242-COPS if you see something or hear anything that you're concerned about. Okay, I think with that, takeout, it's Taco Tuesday, so we are all getting tacos from Bob's Burgers today. Questions?
So we have one question from Ryan Franklin at GOV and a similar question from Joseph Dyer at the Albuquerque Journal. Both questions asking, did you say that we have not seen an increase in domestic violence calls?
So again, based on our call volume that we record, and if we want to actually flip to that slide, the numbers are right here, so they can reference this slide. And you can see, I mean, it's up 1%, so we have seen technically an increase, but it has, basically been flat. And again, we actually view this as concerning because we're worried about underreporting.
The same question for child abuse calls. Can you quantify the decline in child abuse calls?
Sure, and for that one, actually, let me bring up Lieutenant Sanders.
I don't have a graph to show anybody right now. However, the number of calls for service to child abuse are down. However, that does not give a clear reflection about what we're seeing. A lot of child abuse calls come in about simple things as like a child missing an eye appointment. And that adds to the numbers for the calls. However, we are still seeing a good consistency about the serious injuries to children being reported in, and we are responding to all of those calls.
One more from KOB. How much is the third party reporting down, and when should neighbors, bystanders, and others know to call the police about possible domestic violence?
Okay, question is how much is the third party call volume down, and when should neighbors know, and how should they know when to call? So for that one, I might start with Bailey. Would you be the best person on for advocate calls, or Lieutenant Norris? Okay, let's Lieutenant Norris answer that one.
Thank you. So as far as third-party calling goes and those being down, those are actually going to feed into, or we can refer back to the graph that we have up here, is all calls, regardless of whether they're people who are directly involved or who are third-party or reporting third-party, that's going to be quantified with these graphs. So it's not necessarily that the third-party calls are down. It's going to be, just like Mayor said, they're probably, I think it shows an increase of maybe 1% for this month. And the second half of that question was what? I'm sorry.
When do people know when they should actually, or how are people supposed to know when they should actually call to report a domestic violence?
Sure. So it wouldn't change in any other circumstance, pandemic or non-pandemic. Is if you're hearing arguing from your next door neighbor, or if you happen to be a witness to a domestic violence, whether it's in person or, like I said, it's something that you hear and you fear that somebody's safety is in danger, or you feel that it's getting to a point to where it's going to escalate to physical violence, never hesitate to call. The goal is to call to have law enforcement intervention prior to any physical violence. That's the goal. So it's really what you're hearing, what you're observing is going to determine on whether or not you believe that you should call. If it's something that you feel is going to escalate to physical violence, definitely give us a call.
We have one from Maida Aguilar with Novición. Some victims are undocumented and don't report because they're afraid of being reported to ICE. Can you talk about that?
Sure. The question is about victims who are afraid of being reported to ICE, and just want to remind them that based on our city ordinances, that is not something that APD or any city official is allowed to do under city ordinances. So they should feel comfortable and safe calling, again, APD or any city government office.
Thank you. We have one from Chris McKee at Cherokee. Are officers or caseworkers in any specialized units reaching out or considering doing some kind of proactive door knocks on families' homes where they perhaps officers
The question is about sort of proactive door knocks, check-ins on situations where they've been there in the past. And that's something probably we'll check with one of our lieutenants, or Bailey on. Okay, come on up.
So due to the social distancing guidelines and people being really wary about, just in general, people doing knock and talks at their door, we haven't been doing that. That doesn't mean that's something that we do outside of the pandemic, but we're really trying to minimize contact where it's not necessary. One of the things that we are doing is after a victim reports that they are a victim of domestic violence, after we get a call, our advocate unit does reach back out to these victims and try to inform them about case status, if it's been assigned, as well as give them information about resources that are available. So that's our proactive measure, trying to get them connected so that they don't have to reach out first.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your questions. We will be back again tomorrow at 11:30. And unless something major comes up, we're going to talk about homelessness and specifically the Gateway Center project, which I know we haven't talked much about because of all things Corona, but they're actually in many ways related now, and so we'll talk about that tomorrow. Okay, we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you.